Don Fry. Enter Don Fry. Mustache like a 1970s cop. Hands wrapped in tape because gloves were for people who cared about their knuckles. Fry wasn't just a fighter. He was a statement. A walking, talking middle finger to anyone who thought toughness was dead in modern America. He fought like a man who had nothing to lose and everything to prove. A former amateur wrestler turned barroom brawler turned cage legend. His most famous moment? A fight that had no technique, no strategy, no brilliance. Just two men standing in front of each other throwing bombs until one fell down. Fry versus Yoshihiro Takayama in Pride. It lasted less than 6 minutes. It required no commentary. Just watch two human beings discover how much damage the human skull can endure. And here's the insane part. Fry won that fight, walked backstage, and his face looked like it had been through a cheese grater. But he smiled, because in his era, that was victory. You didn't need to look good. You needed to be the last man standing. Don Fry represented the original ethos. Toughness above all. Strategy could wait. Technique could wait. Right now, we're finding out who the real men are. But even Fry understood something crucial. This couldn't last forever. You can't build a sport on concussions and broken bones. Something had to change. The world just didn't know it yet. Oleg Taktarov. While Don Fry was throwing haymakers, another man was playing chess. Oleg Taktarov arrived from Russia with a Sambo background, a calm demeanor, and a terrifying realization. If you fought smart, you could win without taking unnecessary damage. Radical concept, right? Taktarov competed in UFC 6, a tournament where he had to win 3 fights in one night. 3 fights, one night. No sane athletic commission would allow that today. But in 1995, that was Tuesday. And here's how Taktarov survived it. He didn't try to finish everyone in the first round. He controlled distance. He used his grappling to nullify strikers. He made his opponents work, tire, break. Then when they had nothing left, he took them apart. In the finals, he faced Tank Abbott, a street fighter who looked like he ate motorcycles for breakfast. Abbott outweighed him, outmuscled him, out-crazied him, and Taktarov choked him unconscious. But the genius wasn't the finish, it was everything before it. Taktarov understood that in a sport with no rounds and no time limits, cardio was a weapon, patience was a weapon, making your opponent waste energy was a weapon. This was the first glimpse of strategy entering the cage. Fry wanted to break you. Taktarov wanted to outlast you. Both approaches worked, but only one was sustainable. And slowly, the sport began to realize maybe this wasn't just about toughness, maybe it was about intelligence too. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the evolution of combat sports, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and drop a like. We're just getting started, and trust me, the next chapter gets even crazier. Mark Kerr. Now we enter the era of the superhuman. Mark Kerr was a different breed. NCAA Division I wrestling champion, built like a Greek statue carved out of granite. Explosiveness that made heavyweights look like they were moving in fast forward. Kerr didn't just win fights, he destroyed people. His ground and pound was suffocating. His top control was oppressive. When he put you on your back, the fight was essentially over. But here's the tragedy of Mark Kerr. He was too good for his own good. His dominance exposed the sport's biggest flaw. There was no safety net. The rules were still too loose, the medical oversight was minimal. Fighters were getting hurt badly, and the public was starting to ask uncomfortable questions. Kerr himself became a cautionary tale. The pressure to perform, the lack of regulation around performance-enhancing substances, the brutal toll on his body, it all caught up with him. His story was immortalized in the documentary The Smashing Machine, and it's one of the most heartbreaking films in sports history. But Kerr's impact wasn't just personal. His dominance forced organizations to ask, if one man can be this overwhelming, do we need weight classes? Do we need rounds? Do we need better medical oversight? The answer, painfully obvious in hindsight, was yes to all of it. Mark Kerr didn't just highlight the need for rules. He proved that without them, even the strongest would break. Then came Kevin Randleman, and everything exploded. If Mark Kerr was a tank, Randleman was a fighter jet. He moved like a lightweight, but hit like a heavyweight. His athletic ability was so absurd that it forced everyone else to level up or get left behind. Randleman was a 2-time NCAA Division I wrestling champion. But unlike traditional wrestlers who grinded you down, Randleman launched you. His slams were legendary. His speed was terrifying. He could close distance faster than you could blink and put you on your back before your brain registered what happened. One of the most iconic moments in MMA history, Randleman lifting Fedor Emelianenko, the greatest heavyweight of all time, over his head and spiking him onto his neck. It looked like a murder attempt. Fedor, somehow, survived and won the fight. But the image remains. Randleman, airborne, defying physics and common sense. But here's what Randleman represented. The sport was evolving beyond toughness and strategy. Now, you needed to be an athlete, a freak athlete. You needed conditioning, explosiveness, speed, and power. And as athleticism entered the cage, the old guard started to fade. The brawlers who relied on heart alone couldn't keep up. The sport was demanding more, and the fighters who couldn't adapt were left behind. Randleman's era marked a shift. MMA wasn't just a fight anymore. It was becoming a sport, a real, legitimate athletic competition. And that meant regulations had to follow. Jens Pulver. While heavyweights were throwing each other across the cage, a 145-pound man was proving that violence didn't require size. Jens Pulver was fast, impossibly fast. His hands moved like lightning, and his fighting style was pure aggression condensed into a smaller frame. Pulver became the UFC's first ever lightweight champion, and his reign proved something critical. You didn't need to be a heavyweight to be exciting. You didn't need to rely on one-punch power. You could win with volume, speed, and relentless pressure. His fights were technical but brutal, precise but violent. He didn't waste energy on unnecessary damage. Every punch had a purpose. Every combination was designed to break his opponent's will without breaking his own body. Pulver represented a turning point. The sport was realizing that brutality and technique weren't opposites. They could coexist. You could be fast and devastating. You could be controlled and violent. And this realization opened the door for smaller fighters to thrive. Weight classes became more respected. Lighter divisions gained legitimacy. The sport stopped being just about who's the toughest and started being about who's the best. Jens Pulver didn't just win fights. He proved that the future of MMA wasn't about surviving damage. It was about avoiding it while delivering it with precision. Murilo Bustamante. Then came the Brazilians. And with them, a philosophy that would change everything. Murilo Bustamante wasn't the flashiest fighter. He wasn't the most explosive, but he was one of the smartest. A Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt under Carlson Gracie, Bustamante understood something the brawlers didn't: control beats chaos. His fights were masterclasses in positional dominance. He didn't rush, he didn't force. He methodically advanced position, eliminated options, and when the moment came, he finished. Bustamante became the UFC middleweight champion, and his reign was a statement. Technique was king. You could be strong, fast, and tough, but if you didn't understand leverage, angles, and timing, you'd lose to someone who did. This was the emergence of technical control, not just winning, but winning in a way that minimized risk. Bustamante rarely got hit, rarely found himself in danger. He dictated pace, position, and outcome, and this philosophy spread. Fighters realized that the goal wasn't just to hurt your opponent, it was to dominate them so completely that they couldn't hurt you back. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu became essential. Wrestling became essential. Striking became more calculated. The sport was maturing, and with that maturity came safer competition. Because when fighters focused on control, they took less damage. And when they took less damage, they could have longer careers. The cage was still brutal, but it was no longer mindless. Wanderlei Silva. Quick pause. If you're still with me, you're part of the real ones. Smash that like button and subscribe, because we're about to talk about one of the most terrifying humans to ever step into a ring. Now, let's talk about Wanderlei Silva. Silva was violence personified, but here's the twist. His violence was controlled, calculated, strategic. In Pride Fighting Championships, Silva became a legend by doing one thing better than anyone else: organized chaos. He came forward like a tsunami, throwing knees, punches, and elbows in combinations that seemed random, but were devastatingly effective. His fights in the Pride ring were wars, but they were wars fought within a system: rounds, rules, referees, medical checks, weight classes. Silva was still terrifying, but he was operating inside a structure that protected both him and his opponents. This was the paradox of modern MMA. You could still be aggressive, still be violent, still be a killer, but now there were guardrails. And those guardrails didn't make the sport less exciting. They made it sustainable. Silva's era proved that regulation didn't kill the spirit of combat. It refined it. Fighters could still go to war, but now they'd live to fight another day. The sport had found its balance. Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira. And then there was Minotauro. Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira might be the toughest human being to ever compete in MMA. Not because he could dish out damage, but because he could absorb it and still win. Nogueira's fights were psychological warfare. He'd get hit, dropped, bloodied, and then from the bottom, he'd pull off a submission and win. His triangle chokes and arm bars from impossible positions became legendary. But here's what Nogueira truly represented: intelligence. He didn't need to hurt you badly to beat you. He needed to survive, adapt, and capitalize on one mistake. His fight with Bob Sapp is the perfect example. Sapp was 100 pounds heavier, stronger, and more explosive. He threw Nogueira around like a rag doll, but Nogueira stayed calm, waited, and when Sapp made one small error, armbar, fight over. Nogueira proved that MMA had fully evolved. It wasn't about being the toughest anymore. It wasn't even about being the strongest or fastest. It was about being the smartest. And in a sport built on controlled violence, intelligence became the ultimate weapon. From Don Frye's bare-knuckle wars to Nogueira's cerebral brilliance, the journey of MMA is the journey from chaos to order, from barbarism to sport. These 9 fighters didn't just compete. They built the foundation. They showed us that violence could be controlled without being sanitized, that aggression could coexist with intelligence, that the cage could be brutal and safe at the same time. Today's fighters stand on their shoulders. Every rule, every regulation, every safety measure exists because these men pushed the limits and showed us where the line needed to be drawn. The sport evolved, but it never lost its soul. If this video opened your eyes to the roots of the sport, do me one last favor. Subscribe, hit the bell, and drop a comment telling me which era of fighting you wish you could have witnessed live. I'll see you in the next one.